My twin sister got everything from mom. Then she kicked me out. The reflection in the mirror has always been a stark reminder of what I wasn't. My twin sister, Michelle, and I, both 26, are fraternal twins, not identical. This seemingly minor biological detail cast a long, cold shadow over my entire childhood. While Michelle emerged from the womb bearing an uncanny resemblance to our mother, the same striking blue eyes, the same cascade of golden brown hair, the same delicate curve of the nose, I, with my darker features and more angular face, was an anomaly. I was a genetic stranger in my own home, a living testament to a divergent path in our shared DNA. My mother, bless her complicated soul, never made any secret of her favoritism. She saw in Michelle a younger, untarnished version of herself, a canvas upon which she could paint the life she had always dreamed of but never quite achieved. Michelle was her golden child, her miniature muse, her personal project. Every family photograph, every casual conversation, every shared glance between them was a subtle, aching exclusion for me. I was the overlooked twin, the one standing just outside the spotlight, forever yearning for a sliver of the affection Michelle received effortlessly. For the first few years of my life, I tried, with the desperate, unyielding hope of a child, to win her attention. I would mimic Michelle's poses, adopt her mannerisms, even try to replicate her clothes and hairstyles, hoping that if I just looked enough like them, my mother would finally see me. But my attempts were met with cruel laughter, a shared, dismissive amusement that only solidified my outsider status. Michelle, caught in her mother's orbit, rarely intervened. She would often join in the teasing, her own innocent cruelty a reflection of the favoritism she absorbed. Eventually, the child in me withered, replaced by a quiet, resigned acceptance. I stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. I stopped craving my mother's affection, replacing that gaping void with a fiercely independent spirit. And then, a lifeline appeared in the most unexpected form: my younger brother, Dennis. 12 years my junior, Dennis was the product of my mother's second marriage. He was a sweet, boisterous boy who, from the moment he could form coherent thoughts, seemed to adore me precisely for who I was. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way my mother never had. He was the joy of my life, the innocent anchor that tethered me to our fractured family, the only reason I continued to maintain even a semblance of contact with my mother and Michelle throughout the years. My biological parents, both young and somewhat overwhelmed, had married at 23, a hasty union compelled by the looming reality of my mother's pregnancy after a 4-year, whirlwind romance with my dad. My mother, an aspiring model in her early 20s, reluctantly traded her runway dreams for the domesticity of a stay-at-home mom. 6 years later, a tragic accident stole my father from us, leaving my mother a young widow with 2 young daughters. She threw herself into work, leaving Michelle and me in the care of my grandmother, a kind woman who offered a quiet, stable refuge from our mother's volatile grief. It was through work that she met her second husband, our stepfather. He entered our lives 3 years after my father's passing, a gentle, unassuming man who, for the first time, brought a semblance of normalcy to our home. He was the only father I truly remembered, and his presence, though subtle, significantly improved our strained family dynamics. He saw my mother's favoritism, her quiet cruelty towards me, and occasionally, he would gently intervene, urging her to be more inclusive. Sometimes, for a fleeting moment, it worked, but his greatest gift to me wasn't his attempts at mediation, it was Dennis. Dennis was his biological son, my half-brother, but in my heart, he was simply my brother, my unwavering champion, the light that pierced through the constant gloom of my mother's neglect. Without him, I often wonder if I would have completely detached from them all, lost in the quiet loneliness of my own neglected existence. Our stepfather passed away a few years ago, a cardiac arrest claiming him too early, in his late 50s. Though unexpected, it wasn't a complete shock. He had battled heart problems for years. His death was a quiet sadness, a further erosion of the stability he had brought. A few months later, another devastating blow. My mother called us both, her voice surprisingly brittle, to tell us she had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. The news, though terrible, triggered a familiar, complicated set of emotions within me, a mix of grief for a future that would never be, and a deep-seated weariness for the inevitable drama that would follow. For the next 2 years, she fought with a fierce, unwavering will, Enduring countless treatments, her once vibrant beauty slowly consumed by the ravages of the disease. Michelle and I, along with Dennis, moved back into her house. Or, at least, that was the story she spun for concerned friends and family. The truth, raw and painful, was that she only wanted Michelle by her side. I was a necessary inconvenience, a reluctant caretaker for Dennis, who was still a minor, and whom my mother was loath to relinquish custody of, even from her sickbed. The thought of living under the same roof as my mother and Michelle again, after all these years, was a true nightmare. I suggested taking Dennis back to my apartment, promising to bring him for weekend visits. This would allow me to maintain some distance, some sanity. But my mother was absolute in her demands. She was dying, she reminded me, her voice laced with a manipulative fragility. This was her final wish. And Dennis, a teenager already grappling with the imminent loss of his mother, clung to the familiar comforts of his home and friends. Moving him away, to my life in a distant neighborhood, would have compounded his trauma. Ultimately, I couldn't bring myself to inflict more pain on him. And so, for the next 2 years, the four of us lived together in a strange, suffocating tableau of familial obligation and unspoken resentment. When she finally slipped away 6 weeks ago, the house became a vacuum of quiet grief. I felt a profound sadness, not for the mother who had ignored me, but for the life that had been. Dennis, though he understood her differential treatment of Michelle and me, had genuinely loved her, and he was deeply, visibly heartbroken. But Michelle's reaction was what truly unsettled us. We had both expected her to be utterly shattered, completely undone by the loss of the woman who had idolized her. Instead, she seemed unaffected. Within days, she was not just going about her life. She was practically radiating a strange, almost manic happiness. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her composure was so unsettling that I found myself scrutinizing her every move, searching for any flicker of normal grief. There was none. A week after the funeral, our mother's lawyer and the executor of her will gathered us. The reading of the will was a predictable, if still painful, confirmation of my mother's favoritism. Every significant asset, every piece of property, every investment account, all of it, without exception, was bequeathed to Michelle. I received one item, her wedding ring from her first marriage to my biological father. It was a simple, understated piece, not monetarily valuable, a relic of a hasty, shotgun wedding from two young people trying to do the right thing. It held sentimental value, a small piece of a history I barely remembered, and I accepted it without complaint. My stepfather's assets, the money and property he had accumulated, had already passed to my mother upon his death, as his estranged family had no interest in claiming them. She, in turn, had carefully designated those funds for Dennis, placing them into a trust he would be able to access on his 18th birthday. It was a small comfort, a quiet legacy from the man who had truly cared for us all. I had anticipated this outcome. Michelle was her golden child, after all. A familiar twinge of jealousy tightened in my gut, quickly suppressed. I was a grown woman, with a stable career. I didn't need her money. What I didn't anticipate was Michelle's reaction. As the lawyer meticulously listed the vast inheritance, Michelle, instead of expressing gratitude or even feigning humility, rolled her eyes. A subtle, almost imperceptible scoff escaped her lips. Even the stoic lawyer, a man accustomed to the theatrics of grieving families, paused, a flicker of surprise in his expression. After he had left, the silence in the room was thick with unspoken questions. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michelle," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "what is wrong with you? You just inherited a fortune, and you look like you just ate a lemon." And what was that reaction in front of the lawyer? "Are you really so unaffected by Mom's death?" She looked at me, her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, now held a deep, weary cynicism. "I tried to be sad," she admitted, her voice flat. "I really did. But I can't. I hated her. I hated her my whole life." Her words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me momentarily speechless. Michelle, the favored child, the object of my mother's obsessive devotion, had hated her? It made no sense. Hated her? I finally managed to stammer. "But she adored you. She put you on a pedestal." Michelle let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's why I hated her," she said, her voice raw with years of suppressed anger. "She didn't adore me. She adored the reflection of herself she saw in me. She molded me, twisted me, forced me into being something I never wanted to be. My whole life was a performance for her. She described a childhood of relentless pressure. Our mother, desperate to relive her lost modeling dreams through Michelle, had subjected her to a constant, suffocating scrutiny. Michelle's weight was meticulously monitored, her every meal an act of defiance or submission. Her clothes, her makeup, her very persona, all were carefully curated to fit my mother's vision of perfection. I never had a single moment to just be myself, Michelle explained, her voice thick with emotion. Not even for a second, because I saw what happened to you when you tried to be different. I saw how she ignored you, how she treated you like you didn't belong. I didn't want that for myself. So I played along. I was the perfect daughter, the mini her she always wanted. She admitted that she had consciously stayed on our mother's good side, knowing that financial reward was the ultimate prize. Our mother, after remarrying our stepfather, had initially returned to her role as a stay-at-home mom. But after Dennis was born, financial realities shifted. They needed a second income to comfortably raise 3 children. Instead of pursuing a traditional career, my mother, ever the entrepreneur with a flair for the superficial, ventured into life coaching. Her business, run with a friend, was a masterclass in repackaging generic self-help platitudes into exclusive, high-ticket packages for the affluent. It was, in essence, a lucrative scam, but it worked. The business thrived, and my mother, with her charisma and superficial charm, eventually became a partner, accumulating a considerable fortune by the time of her diagnosis. That wealth, combined with the inheritance from our stepfather, now belonged solely to Michelle. She confirmed that throughout her life, because she had so diligently played the role of the perfect daughter, everything she ever wanted had been provided for. College tuition, a down payment on her first apartment, even a new car, it had all been a reward for her silent obedience. Hearing her speak, really speak, for the first time in our lives, about the profound emotional toll of being our mother's golden child, offered a raw, unvarnished insight into her pain. It wasn't the life of sunshine and rainbows I had always envisioned for her. Her resentment, her quiet fury, had been building for decades, masked by a facade of perfect daughterhood. Even as an adult, she had been unable to escape our mother's pervasive influence. After graduating college, Michelle had dreamed of opening her own restaurant, a creative outlet for her true passions. But our mother, with her relentless ambition, had strong-armed her into modeling, determined to live out her own unrealized dreams through her daughter. Michelle, trapped by the years of obedience, couldn't say no. For the past few years, she had been juggling grueling modeling auditions, a demanding day job, and tirelessly saving money, all while suffocating under her mother's expectations. Now, with the inheritance, she finally saw a path to escape. She could fund her restaurant, reclaim her life, and finally shed the suffocating skin of her mother's ideal daughter. After her confession, a strange, unexpected wave of empathy washed over me. For the first time, I saw her not as the favored twin, but as another victim of our mother's manipulations. I hugged her, a spontaneous gesture that felt both awkward and deeply meaningful. It was the closest we had ever been. I dared to hope that, perhaps, a genuine sisterly bond could finally begin to form. That hope, however, was brutally short-lived. A few days later, Michelle delivered another bombshell. She informed me, her voice devoid of emotion, that she was planning to move her boyfriend and business partner, Alex, into the house. And because it would be awkward for all of us to live together, she needed Dennis and me to vacate the premises by the end of the week. The house, she reminded me, was now hers. I was stunned. The fragile bridge we had just begun to build crumbled to dust around us. I was more than ready to move out myself. The house was steeped in too many painful memories, and I craved my own space. But Dennis, my young, impressionable brother, was my primary concern. He had already lost our mother. Abruptly uprooting him from the only home and neighborhood he had ever known, tearing him away from his friends and his school, would be an unforgivable act of cruelty. I tried to reason with her, to appeal to any lingering sense of familial empathy. "Michelle," I pleaded, "it's only a few more years until Dennis graduates high school. Let him finish here. Then the house is all yours. If you really want to live with Alex, you have the money now. You could rent an apartment with him. You don't have to kick us out." I reiterated that my concern wasn't for myself. I had no desire for the house. It was solely for Dennis, for his stability, for his emotional well-being. But Michelle, cloaked in her newfound power and wealth, was unyielding. She didn't care. The house was hers, and she alone would decide who stayed and who left. Her words were a chilling echo of our mother's own cold dismissal. The realization that Michelle, in her quest for independence, had become just as selfish and unfeeling as the mother she claimed to hate was a bitter pill to swallow. I refused to give her the satisfaction of waiting. The very next day, Dennis and I packed what we could and moved in with a friend. I explained the situation to Dennis, laying out Michelle's callous words with an unvarnished honesty. He was upset, of course, but he understood. He had witnessed his mother's favoritism and Michelle's quiet complicity for years. He knew, instinctively, not to expect better from her. We had fled our home, but at least we had each other. In the following days, I went completely no contact with Michelle. There was nothing left to say, no relationship left to salvage. Dennis, though quietly mournful for the loss of his home, slowly began to adjust to our temporary new life. He found solace in his school, his friends, and the unwavering presence of his older sister. Almost a week after our abrupt departure, Michelle called. Her voice, usually so composed, was a strangled, hysterical sob. She was in a full-blown panic. She had done something incredibly stupid, something selfish and careless, and now she needed my help. The something was our mother's jewelry box. Not the unassuming wedding band from my biological father, but the valuable collection of gold, diamonds, and precious stones our mother had acquired over the years. Expensive pieces she rarely wore, preferring to keep them hidden in a battered, unassuming wooden box in her closet, a cunning disguise for their true worth. In her haste to clear out our mother's room, to make space for her boyfriend, Michelle had impulsively given the ugly jewelry box away to Alex's sister, Clara, thinking it was just a junk trinket. Now, Clara was refusing to return it. My first thought was call a lawyer. This was a clear-cut case of property theft. The will explicitly stated Michelle was the sole inheritor of our mother's belongings. She had every legal right to demand its return. But Michelle, through her sobs, explained the tangled web she had woven. Clara, upon discovering the true value of the contents, had flat-out refused to return the box. And Alex, her boyfriend and supposed business partner, was backing his sister. He had made it explicitly clear, if Michelle pursued legal action, if she dared to ruin his family's reputation, he would end their relationship and their business venture immediately. She was trapped. She couldn't alienate Alex, not with her dreams of a restaurant tied to his supposed investment. And she certainly couldn't involve anyone else without risking his wrath. So, with nowhere else to turn, she had called me, the sister she had so carelessly evicted, begging for my help. My immediate response was a cold refusal. She had been selfish, cruel, and utterly thoughtless. Why should I, the overlooked twin, bail her out of a mess she had created through her own greed and desperation? I told her not to call me again, and I blocked her number. But the guilt, a tiny, insidious worm, began to burrow into my conscience. She was my sister, and despite everything, I couldn't completely shake the memory of her vulnerability when she confessed her resentment of our mother. Could I really leave her completely stranded? The internal debate raged. My logical mind screamed for self-preservation, for the satisfaction of letting her face the consequences of her actions alone. My emotional side, a part of me I rarely acknowledged, whispered about family, about the inherent bond of twinship, however fractured. My current living situation, while temporary, was stable. Dennis was adjusting well, and my friend, Sarah, was incredibly supportive. I had even started looking into a work-from-home arrangement to ease my commute and better accommodate Dennis's needs. Getting involved in Michelle's drama would be a step backward, a re-entry into the chaos I had just escaped. But then, an email from Michelle landed in my work inbox. She must have found my company's public contact information. This time, the tone was different. It wasn't the hysterical begging of the phone call. It was a long, heartfelt apology. She admitted her selfishness, her desperation to escape our mother's shadow and live her own life. She acknowledged the cruelty of kicking us out, confessing that she had been so consumed by her own dreams that she hadn't considered the impact on Dennis. She also revealed her fear of the legal repercussions. The inheritance was still in probate. She worried that giving away a significant portion of the estate's assets, especially without formal documentation, could lead to legal trouble, potentially jeopardizing her entire inheritance. She was afraid to even talk to our mother's lawyer about it. I still believed a lawyer would easily retrieve the jewelry, but I also recognized the raw fear and ignorance in her words. She was floundering, desperate. And for someone who claimed to be building a business, her naivete about financial and legal matters was alarming. It was infuriating to see her so weak, so easily manipulated by her boyfriend and his sister, especially after she had been so strong-willed in her determination to kick us out. I also found myself questioning Alex's motives. If he was truly investing in her business, why couldn't he simply buy his sister new jewelry or compensate her for returning it? It reeked of something deeper, something far more sinister than mere impoliteness. My sympathy, a flickering ember, grew a little warmer. A few days later, Michelle showed up at Sarah's doorstep. Dennis was out with friends, and Sarah and I were chatting in the living room. It was awkward. I stepped outside, insisting we talk there. She had pulled strings, she said, to find me. She looked desperate, but this time, there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes, a desperate resolve. She reiterated her apology, her voice shaking but sincere. And then she made an offer that was both manipulative and enticing. If I helped her retrieve the jewelry, she would split the entire inheritance with me. My mind reeled. Splitting the inheritance would solve my financial anxieties, allow me to buy a proper apartment for Dennis and me, and give me a cushion of security I hadn't known since our father died. It was a tempting proposition. I agreed, but with one condition. We would involve a lawyer. A written agreement. I didn't trust her, and I made that clear. To my surprise, she readily accepted, acknowledging my distrust as earned. She then explained the full extent of Alex's influence. He wasn't actually financing her business. He was merely offering his time and expertise, an investment that had yet to materialize. He was a parasite, feeding off her ambition, threatening to abandon her at the slightest challenge. The business partner was a sham, a fantasy she clung to, desperate to escape her mother's shadow. I looked at her, at the woman who had been both my oppressor and my sister, and I felt a wave of protective fury. He was using her. I told her so, bluntly. She listened, her eyes downcast. I wasn't sure if she would leave him, but for now, she just needed me to help her fight. The written agreement was drawn up and signed. It was time to face Alex and Clara. The confrontation with Alex and Clara was a raw, ugly spectacle. We met at Alex's apartment, a cramped space filled with the lingering smell of stale fast food. The moment I mentioned the jewelry box, Alex exploded. He didn't just yell, he screamed, a torrent of vile, misogynistic abuse directed primarily at Michelle. He called her names I wouldn't repeat, his face contorted with a primal rage. Michelle, cowering in a corner, just wept silently. When I tried to intervene, to remind him that his reputation was his own responsibility, he turned his fury on me, throwing objects, cursing, and becoming physically aggressive. I stood my ground, my own temper rising, but a cold calculation kept me from escalating it further. He was clearly a volatile, dangerous man, and I knew that if he laid a hand on me, the police would be involved immediately, a consequence he seemed desperate to avoid. After a prolonged, terrifying argument, he finally, reluctantly, called Clara. She arrived, sullen and defiant, but under the glare of her brother's anger and the implicit threat of legal action from me, she handed over the wooden box. The moment the box was back in Michelle's hands, Alex, his face still contorted with rage, spat a final stream of insults at her and stormed out, slamming the door. Michelle collapsed onto the floor, utterly broken. Despite all the years of resentment, despite her recent cruelty, I found myself sitting beside her, wrapping my arms around her as she sobbed. I told her everything would be okay, that she was finally free of him. She apologized, a real, guttural apology for everything she had put me through, for all the years of neglect and recent betrayal. In that moment, our sisterly bond, buried under decades of pain and resentment, began to slowly, tentatively, heal. True to her word, Michelle has been meticulously preparing to split the inheritance with me once the probate process is finalized. We have begun having real conversations, not just about our future, but about our past, slowly dismantling the walls that had separated us for so long. Dennis and I have moved into a new apartment, a place of our own, a quiet sanctuary where he can thrive. Michelle has invited us to move back into our mother's house, now her house, but I've asked for time. We need space, a period of quiet healing before we can truly embrace this new, fragile beginning. We're taking it one day at a time, each step cautious, but filled with a tentative hope. My life, once defined by the shadow of neglect and the trauma of betrayal, is slowly, painstakingly, being rebuilt. The future is uncertain, but for the first time, I feel a quiet sense of possibility. And in that, I have found a profound and unexpected peace.